Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. The strange case of Mr. Navalny, the West's favorite opposition figure in Russia, who doesn't have much popularity in Russia, is in the news. He's in Germany right now after some claim, he may claim as well, that he was poisoned while traveling through Russia. He was taken by, demanded by his family and friends that he be transported to Germany for medical care. Russian doctors said that they found no evidence of any kind of poisoning. But now we have German officials, and it seems that it's more political at this point, claim fairly likely and a certain probability that he was poisoned. So this is again where science meets politics. To delve into this, we have George Szamuely. He's an author, commentator, and a co-founder of this channel. George, what do you make of all of this? We have this linguistic mumbo jumbo thrown in as well. Go ahead.
It's a deja vu all over again. We're going through the same routine that we went through with the Skripals, whereby government officials were shooting their mouths off prior to any kind of scientific finding. So far, the Berlin doctors who are treating Navalny have said nothing. They've issued no statement, but Angela Merkel's spokesperson, the one that you just quoted, is the one who said it's fairly likely. Now, fairly likely is almost meaningless. I mean, it's an absolutely meaningless term of art. I mean, it's like it's just about slightly above. Well, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. Who the hell knows? But the notion that you can come out with this sort of statement, fairly likely, and given the incendiary nature of the subject, I mean, the idea that you're saying that the Russian government poisoned one of its citizens, poisoned a man who the West deems to be a kind of a leading opposition figure, that's an explosive charge. And if all you've got to back it up is a fairly likely, then you have to think it is absolute recklessness. And say it's also exerting pressure on the doctors. Hey, you better come up with a finding that we would deem acceptable.
Well, they found caffeine in his blood through a urine test. We know that. Okay, so they're doing something here. They haven't been able to determine any other anomaly at this point here. So they did let on that some kind of medical treatment has been ongoing. This whole thing, first of all, if Mr. Navalny was such a threat to the existing political order, why would he be allowed to leave? Number one. Number two, if he had been poisoned, don't you think German doctors, they're pretty good doctors, I guess, would be able to determine that? It seems to me it's fairly likely that this is not the case. Okay. I'm not particularly interested in Mr. Navalny. He has faded through the years. His popularity is at around 2%, if even that and that's a margin of error right there. I have to wonder if this story is to kind of resurrect his currency in the eyes of the West. We have all of the events going on in Belarus. I mean, again, when I see claims of malfeasance like this, I have to wonder, who does it benefit? It certainly doesn't benefit the Russian government. And you sent me the link from the Yahoo News, which is a pretty thorough story. But they say that this is a pattern that the Kremlin uses against, quote unquote, its opponents. But it didn't give any examples, did it, in that article? It didn't name any names, okay? Right. Which I think is, again, malpractice on the part of media. Because what we have gotten now from Russiagate, you remember the collective wisdom of the intelligence community, an intelligence assessment that I think was put together in a matter of weeks, 16 intelligence agencies. No, now we know it was basically 2 that were involved, and they came up kind of, maybe they've patented, maybe now they can earn some kind of intellectual property off of fairly likely and a certain probability, because now this is being applied to everything, George. People like ourselves and our viewers, we are put in a position where we have to prove the negative.
Yes, and of course, proving a negative is notoriously impossible. One thinks of Bertrand Russell's famous example of a teapot. So he says, if I were to assert that there is a teapot orbiting the Earth, and somebody doesn't believe it, the onus is on the person who is making the assertion about the orbiting teapot. It's not the onus is not on the person to disprove that there is a teapot orbiting the Earth. So you want to say something that somebody has been poisoned, show us the evidence. Don't say that it's fairly likely or highly likely. You've got to show the evidence, and that hasn't happened. Now the Germans are in a bind because they can't really pull a Theresa May here. I mean, Theresa May basically denied all access to the Russians. Any attempt by the Russians to say, well, we'd like to see some of this evidence of poisoning of the Skripals. The British refused to cooperate at all, showed them nothing. But in this case, the Russian government had agreed to transport one of its citizens who was in quite a serious physical condition. They agreed for him to be taken to Germany for medical treatment. The Germans can't now turn around and say, well, we're not going to show you any of our medical records. We're not going to show you our findings, because then the Russians will say, well, you betrayed our trust. We trusted you.
What would happen if it was reversed? What would happen, George, if it was reversed?
That's exactly right. I mean, people say, hey, this is unacceptable. This is, a citizen of Germany, and the German government isn't allowed to have access to a German citizen in Russia. Absolutely impossible. So Merkel has kind of got herself into a bind here. She seems to be committed now to this poisoning thesis, but she's going to have to cooperate with the Russians, because otherwise she will have committed quite a serious a diplomatic faux pas, because the Russians had trusted her. I mean, if they'd known that the Germans weren't going to provide them with this information, they wouldn't have allowed him out of the country.
What isn't thought or talked much about is that Navalny has a lot of enemies within Russia, and I'm not talking among the political elite at all, is that he likes to fashion himself as some kind of anti-corruption figure, which he has been convicted of corruption himself. But he has annoyed a lot of people, because what he does is he looks at people in the elite and claims corrupt activity that may or may not be true. We need evidence for that. But he certainly has annoyed a lot of people. And I can't see how the government really cares one way or another. He's like a gnat on the back of a fly that most people, he's not top of mind on the vast majority of the public. So that may not be the case among think tanks in Washington and London, but the reality is here, if there's people that want to do him harm, it's not the government, it's individuals with private business interests, or maybe low-level government officials involved in some form of corruption. So, I mean, they're really missing the mark here, or said differently, they're not widening the scope enough.
Right. No, that's certainly possible. I mean, there may well be people who have an interest in killing him. However, this poisoning at an airport lounge seems very unlikely. I mean, it's the chances of it succeeding are very dubious. How do they know that he would be here? That this is the tea that he'd be drinking. I mean, it all seems extremely unlikely. I mean, if you want to harm somebody, there are much easier ways of doing so. And there is a pattern in the media that the moment anybody falls ill, who appears to be a dissident or out of favor with the government, they immediately leave poisoning. I mean, this happened a year ago. He had some kind of an allergic reaction. Oh, poisoning. Well, anybody at any time can have an allergic reaction. I mean, who the hell knows? You touch a table, you don't know what's been on that table, some kind of chemicals. I've suffered sudden allergic reactions because you don't know what you're touching. The same thing happened with Politkovskaya. I mean, there was a moment when she got sick on a plane. Well, anyone who's flown on planes, crowded, stressful.
This happened to me this past few months during lockdown. There was a nice upscale grocery store, and they had a new shipment of fruit from the Caucasus, and they cajoled me into buying strawberries and berries and all that. And you know what? I had a severe allergic reaction. And I remembered it happened to me when I visited Grozny, Chechnya. I ate some of the vegetables and fruit, and I had toxic shock. Okay, so these things happen to people. It's really scary too. Okay, so what we want to establish right here is that number one, we don't have all the information necessary. We see the beginnings of the lack of goodwill on some parties here, and not the right questions are being asked.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. And the fact that the German government is shooting its mouth off before the doctors have made any kind of a report shows bad faith. Because if this really were a matter of, okay, let's give him the medical treatment and let's find out what's happening, then the German government would stand back, allow the doctors to treat him, do their toxicological findings, report back, then you make a statement. You don't make a statement, people who have no medical background, no toxicological background, start shooting your mouth off, and then all you've got, the best you've got is fairly likely.
Yep, it reminds me of MH17. Within hours, fairly likely, no forensic evidence was done on that in that terrible incident, but judgments would have been made. Yes. Thanks, George. We're going to keep an eye on this story here, okay? I want to remind everyone to like, share, and subscribe to The Gaggling. We'll see you soon.